Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with Taylorians. This is episode 3 and we are talking about the political evolution. So today I have alongside myself Daniel. Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, I am Daniel.
All right, thank you Daniel. And with us today we have the very famous TLMUN club. So alongside us, we have their student advisor as well. So we'll start with Hoh Shan. Is that okay? You want to introduce yourself?
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Hoh Shan. I'm the president of the club.
Okay. We can move on to KUWT.
Hi everyone. I'm actually the senior advisor of the club.
Oh, okay. And lastly, our very special guest of today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Dorian. I am the club advisor for TLMUN as well as the outreach, volunteerism and advocacy executive in Taylor's.
Okay, I see everyone is like super excited for today's topic. It's a little bit of a touchy topic to talk about politics, but I would like all our audiences to know that just a general disclaimer that the views and opinions of everyone here today is their own, and it is not affiliated with any organizations or universities or any student bodies. So with that, we can kick it off. Daniel, would you like to start off our session for today?
Oh yes, most certainly. So we know how both the Taylor's University Student Council and the Taylor's Lakeside United Nations Club, we both represent democracy, the principles of democracy that many nations enshrine today. And of course, Malaysia, our country, our homeland, is itself a democracy, a representative democracy based off the Westminster system. So the one of the thoughts, very interesting thoughts nowadays, and seeing the news nowadays, is the state of our democracy here in Malaysia. So I'll give it to Hoh Shan. So what do you think about the current state of democracy in the current Malaysian political scene? What is your opinion on it?
Well, considering recent events, the state of democracy in Malaysia, I feel, is at a flashpoint. But I believe that reports of its death are greatly exaggerated. Malaysia's democracy is incredibly resilient, and I believe that it can get through this, just like it has gotten through many, many terrible events before this.
Yeah, that's so true. Because it's been how many years of independence? It's roughly about 60 plus years. And yeah, we're still standing here today. It's pretty amazing. KUWT, do you want to add on to whatever Hoh Shan said?
Yeah, in addition to what Hoh Shan said, I see the recent events in our Malaysian politics is just a step forward into us being a more mature democracy, such as the US, Canada, the UK, those countries. When we compare our own democracy to those countries, we aren't exactly as functioned as them or as mature of a member of citizenship as them. So I would see this situation that we are having with our politics is just another evolution, I would say, for a better democracy and a more mature discourse in terms of politics in Malaysia.
Yeah, I really like how you plugged our title, political evolution and all that thing. But yeah, it's very interesting to see that we are in these clubs. Like I'm in student council, Daniel's in student council, and you guys are in TLMUN. And how do you think that makes you guys better future leaders from Malaysia? Maybe Hoh Shan? Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, I think that joining these clubs, it actually does expose the people who join them to what's going on in the country, right? Joining TUSC, you learn that you as a student council member are a representative of the students, and what you do is essentially a model version of our country's parliament. You represent the students just like our MPs represent the people and their constituencies. And I think to emulate that at a university and a college level is incredibly important, so that young people actually understand their role in the country as citizens and their rights and freedoms, as well as the fact that their vote does count and that their vote can affect and change the future of the country. As for something like TLMUN, I believe that what TLMUN actually offers in this case is that we basically teach you why things are the way they are, and we also teach you a bit more of the technical side of the system. Like Daniel mentioned earlier about this thing called the Westminster system. So for those who don't know, the Westminster system is what is based off the UK system. It's what we have, where we have an election every once in a while, and the leader of the largest party typically becomes the prime minister. We don't elect our prime minister separately like we do in the US. So that's the kind of things we teach in TLMUN, and that we hope by teaching more people about this, they actually understand how our system works, and they're better able not just to defend their own rights, but also defend the rights of their fellow citizens. Yeah.
Okay.
That is quite an interesting take, and something that you have mentioned, which is quite significant, especially nowadays, it's teaching people, especially our youths nowadays. And we can see across the world that youth activism is at one of its highest points in the world, frankly, and in Malaysia as well. As we can even see certain political parties being based off the youth itself. But how do you see the youth develop? What is the current state of the youth in Malaysian politics? Colin, what is your take on this? How are the youths contributing to the current Malaysian political scene?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Daniel. So, in my personal opinion, the youth in Malaysia, although they do not have as much power, as much say in our own right in terms of political power as when compared to a normal MP in Parliament, I believe these allow us to actually voice out to those in power that we have these kinds of ideas on how our country should be governed. Of course, it really depends on how our current leaders whether they really listen to the young people. We can't really say they don't, because some of them, or they do in some cases, if it's a very good idea that actually benefits all layers of society in Malaysia. And I do believe that with the Malaysian mindset, where the youth are the future of a country, it's being pretty much indoctrinated in our own education system. So I believe in the long run, the youth will have more of a say, and that voice will get stronger every day. That's my belief. Thank you.
Very, very, very interesting thought. And indeed, especially for people in the university stage of education, the college stage of education, and these people very soon will become the next generation of leaders in our country. But one thing that's very interesting to think about as well is the differences between the old generation and the new generation, the mindset, the thinking mindset between the two generations, especially in the political scene, like how they conduct themselves in politics, how they enact policies, for example. So what are the key differences you would see between the old and the young? I'll give this to Hoh Shan. Like, what differences do you see nowadays?
Differences. It's tough to say, but I think one thing to note particularly is that young people today more than ever have an interest in transparency and knowing that their voice matters. You can see this through the people that we choose to not idolize, but the people that we choose to see as torchbearers for the future of the youth are people who tend to have full of integrity, and they usually are people who are willing to reach all ends. Young people today, having been born after Malaysia's economic boom, most of us, we grew up after the 1997 crash, right? We just want a nice country to stay in. We just want a peaceful, prosperous country. We want a country where wawasan 2020 can be achieved. Maybe not in 2020 because that's past, right? But maybe 2025 or 2030, we want to get that country. And I guess the general consensus is that young people are very sick of hearing the same thing over and over again, of seeing the same people fight over and over again. And more people want to make sure that since they grew up here, they want to give back. One, they want to give back. Two is they want to make sure that it's better so that the generations after them don't have to go through the same thing they have. Yeah, I think like that's just my opinion about this.
I find that very interesting, Hoh Shan, because I absolutely agree with you. Young people have been empowered and are empowered to, they also know like the situation in other places. This is not necessarily something that previous generations had. Now we have the internet, now we have freer transmission of knowledge. Last time it was very easy for governments to sort of restrict the knowledge from reaching people, what with mass media, and before that like books and publications with newspapers and stuff. And now we are able to see what things are like elsewhere, and we are able to want it for ourselves. So I think that has provided quite a bit of perspective towards for young people. And young people are just not the younger people in Malaysia are just not satisfied with the status quo and the way things have always been, because we see how things are elsewhere, and that's what we want, right? And also I just want to point out that Malaysia is actually a very young democracy. Canada
so
is 150 years old, so is and the United States is a lot older, and these are all steps that a democracy takes to become a mature democracy, right? Where we are able to look past party lines, where we are able to look past racial lines, and all of that good stuff that we always rely on in Malaysia, and we are able to actually look at our representatives and to take a stand, and to be able to to have that informed understanding of, okay, this is what I need from my representative. Is my representative actually representing me? And I think that is something that young people nowadays are more interested in and have more access to. And I feel like this is why it's driving the current political participation by youth. And also the fact that this is happening all over the world, right? So we all have that empowerment that yes, we can actually do something about this, and we want to. So that's fine.
Yeah, so speaking of like representatives, the first person that comes to my mind who's a youth, who's like the most coolest Menteri Parliament and all that. Like, do you guys know who I'm talking about? You know who I'm talking about? Yeah, I see everyone. You think so? No, so it's Syed Saddiq. I feel like he really, really inspires a lot of youths, because he kind of, when he became, he became a minister, right? A minister of youth and all that. And he was one of the youngest ministers. And I feel like he really inspired a lot of youths. And he even pushed for people age 18 to go for voting. And I feel like he's really changing the political landscape, Yeah, I would love to meet him actually. I hope he's listening to this podcast. But So Hoh Shan, like, do you have any other, how do I say it, ministers or politicians that you look up to from Malaysia?
I think one good thing to note is that the younger generation of MPs, people like Nurul Izzah, Syed Saddiq, even people like Kari Jamaluddin and a few others, if I'm not mistaken. These are young people, and people who, when they are in positions of authority or power, have shown that they are competent individuals. And I think that is very crucial if we are to disabuse people of the idea that, because you're young, you have no experience and you cannot get the job done. These people here, like Syed Saddiq, who has he shaved his head bald to raise funds. These people prove that young people not only do they have the energy and passion to want to do things, but they also know how to get it done, right? And I think that's very important, because that's a notion that a lot of people have now in Malaysia still, which is that, if you're young, you should be studying, but it's your country, so think about it.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, like how he's changing the political landscape. So I feel Syed Saddiq got so much of support. He really upped the game that I see other ministers and other politicians. They have TikTok now. They are on Instagram. They have Twitter. And they're like memeing stuff and everything. And I can see how they're trying to fit in, and they're changing with the times. So yeah, that's what I feel. Daniel, do you want to add on anything to that?
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting, that in and being very competent and actually having the holistic goal of improving our country, it truly transcends party lines. Because, for example, Syed Sadiq is currently on the opposition side. Not as I say opposition, rather generally as an opposition member of parliament. While Hoh Shan, you also mentioned Kari Jalaluddin, who is part of the incumbent government as the Minister of Science, Technology, and Innovation. So it truly shows that the youths nowadays, we want to make our country better. Sure, we may be in different parties, but it doesn't mean we can't have the same goals. It does not mean we cannot cooperate. We most certainly can, and we most certainly can go forward with that goal. So that's really all from me.
Yeah, so like just wanna pivot away a little bit from Malaysia. When we go to places like the US, somebody who resembles Syed Sadiq is like AOC. I feel she's really, really good, at fighting. I remember just that one YouTube video of her trashing Mark Zuckerberg on the Facebook thing and all that. And I like the way she handles all the issues. It's so cool. Yeah, it was so funny. Yeah.
Some things we actually, now that you mentioned AOC, right, that is also something that we should also think about as well. The ideas that the youths bring. The reality is, sometimes we as youths, right, we also need to not just be idealistic, we also need to be also a bit pragmatic. We need to understand some things do not work, some things do work. I'll be, using the example of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She supports the Green New Deal, which at least in some versions completely bulldozes the usage of cars, for example. So some things are very ideal. Sure, we want to save the environment. Most certainly, most of us would want to. But that does not mean the method we go with, or at least proposed by them, is necessarily the best idea. So as youth, it's very important for us, even though we have such a strong energy wanting to improve our country, it does not mean we just simply go for random ideas, not necessarily random ideas, but ideas that are too idealistic. We also have to be very pragmatic. So that at least that's how I see it. But yeah, Koen, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, based on what you guys have said, I believe youths around the world, they see what's wrong in the world and they always try to change it, no matter how bleak the situation is or how hard things have gone by probably certain parties to ensure that they do not have a proper voice in the public. But if you see in the news, all around the world, youths are trying. And it does give us some hope that the future is going to be better.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's my opinion.
Yeah. So what's your opinion on people like, for example, like who is that? Donald Trump, he's not a youth, he used to be a youth, he must have been in our position, and he would have been talking about how the politics could be better, how the country could be better. But currently, seeing the state he is in right now, do you think age really matters to being a politician? Because we see that all around the world, like older generation says that you need to be a certain age or not you'll be looked down on and stuff like that. So do you guys have any thoughts on this?
Actually, I don't really believe age is a very huge issue in politics. It's just whether if the leader is open-minded enough to accept new ideas for the sake of improvement. For the example of Trump, which Jonathan has given, it's very hard to say because Trump is a very, I would say, complicated character, which I believe even until now, quite a fair bit of people trying to figure him out.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, so again, my main point is, actually, Kari Jalaluddin, you won't really consider him as a youth because he's almost 45
already.
Oh yeah, 45 already.
Yeah.
It's quite nearly the age of our parents, I assume. Yeah, so it's all about the mindset, Age doesn't matter. Whether if your leader accepts a good idea for the sake of betterment, or they feel comfortable where they are and they do not accept any new ideas that would threaten that status quo. That's my thought for that in terms of mindset and age. Yeah.
So I definitely agree with Kerwin. I believe that age is, well, just a
Just the
number.
number.
Yeah, super cliche. But I feel also that it's important for young people to take power because young people, you are actually living in the time, right? You are actually experiencing what is happening in the world. With that said, I want to also point out that not all young people are the same, right? Not all of us think in the same way, not all of us want the same things. And I feel like, and I find it interesting, Jonathan, that you mentioned that Donald Trump was young once.
Yeah,
yes, he
exactly.
was, but also we need to understand that Donald Trump lives in a very different bubble altogether.
Yes.
Like, he has no idea what things are like for people, like real people, right? Because he's in a different some people say that he's not all there, and I completely agree. But also he is in a different class, different wealth class altogether. He was always famous because of his father, so all of that included, and he's also like been very pathological, like a pathological liar from the start, right? So yeah, I don't think Donald Trump is a good example, but it is a good example of how that not all youth think in the same way. Like, in the same way, like a lot of Trump supporters are the youth.
Mm-hmm.
And it also like points into, it also like shows that, while we have this very progressive movement from the young, we also have another side. People are very polarized in their beliefs, right? There's also another side that is deeply conservative and getting even more so, and we can also see this in Malaysia, as has been displayed all the while, and unfortunately in Malaysia the conservatives are winning. And and so this is something that we're seeing now, right? This deepening gulf between the progressives and the conservatives, even especially among the young. And so now our challenge, I feel, is how to like change the Overton window closer to the left, because right now it is very much to the right. What we see as centrist politics are still very much to the right, and it's not really reflective, especially in Malaysian politics, where we don't really have a strong left. We only see the political parties that are around, and we see that as status quo, but they are center right at best. And of course, like we have very, very right parties. And so for us to bring back the Overton window more towards the left, so that we can actually move forward with progressive policies that we want, I think that is something that the youth really need to work towards.
Actually, if I may add something to what Mr. Dorian has been mentioning, I think the local term for that divide is like, if you go on Twitter, you see stuff like, the Subang bubble, Angsa bubble, the KL bubble, So it does show that in Malaysia, that the divide is there, right? Typically, not always, it's urban and rural areas. Urban areas tend to be a bit more progressive, the rural areas tend to be a bit more conservative, right? I think, like Mr. Dorian mentions, it has always been there. It's just that the same technologies that have been used by young people to power major movements like BLM is the same technology that is deepening and widening this gulf and this divide, right? Social media. So I think us as young people, we recognize we do have some power because we know how to do social media best, but we have to do it wisely. We have to make sure we don't widen that gap until there is no more common ground. Because once we lose that common ground, democracy cannot really work anymore. It will become an us versus them situation, a power grab every 4 years, and that is not a very good situation. Yeah.
That's really interesting to see, because we see a lot of conflict, especially for like politics, happening between like the people and the government at the same time. We see this happening in Indonesia, I think Thailand is Philippines, US, the most like, sensationalized one is the US, obviously. Do you think that is actually right? Because in that point of time, the government is not representing the voice of the people, so they take it to them, like take it to their own hands and actually go out there to actually voice out their things. Do you think that is actually right? Maybe KUWT, you could talk about this a bit.
Actually, could you further elaborate on what's the question? Because
so like I mean like
can I maybe like just put add in? I just want to remind everyone that as Malaysians, as citizens, we have a duty, a civic duty, to be participatory in our politics, and the freedom of speech is something that is guaranteed to us by the Constitution of Malaysia. So I believe that, I mean, there are many avenues for people to raise their concerns and to, push forward, agendas that they want. And one of these ways is with protest. And I believe that as long as it's peaceful, as long as it doesn't cause harm, then I believe that it is a tool in a democracy that should be used. But yeah, this is my opinion on that.
I fully agree, and I think that there is a key word. There is one key word that we can take away in terms of for this situation of what we should do as youth and what we hope to aim for, and that is dialogue between all sides. It doesn't matter if you're on the right, if it doesn't matter on your left. The very important thing is you try to have dialogue with the other side so that you can come to a compromise, and so that you can be able to have this, again, to achieve the holistic goal of improving your country, improving Malaysia. In the end, I think, the very cliche statement that, either extreme will not bring any good. And frankly, that's true. Again, if you're on an extreme, it's very hard for you to be open to dialogue, both on the left and the right. On the left, we have some examples, Antifa, who have been using certain tactics of domestic terrorism. And on the right, we have neo-Nazi Confederates in the US, of course, in the US. So these people, clearly, we cannot bring them to compromise. But we as youth, being the next generation, it's highly essential for us to have the mindset that, okay, we want to be able to have dialogue. We want to be able to talk through it. We must not use violence. It's better to have dialogues through words than through weapons. That is very important. So that is just my take, yeah.
Actually, I do agree with both Dorian and Daniel here. As youth, we have the power in the future to change things. Of course, we need to make sure, both sides of the divide gets a consensus. If not, whatever we're going to try to do, there'll be backlash from either side. I mean, let's just say we try to change things radically, like introducing why LGBT rights all of a sudden, let's just say. And if that happens, conservatives will start protesting. Sure, it's their right, but there will start a lot of protests, there'll be a lot of condemnations. So these are a few examples, you can see in certain countries. In Taiwan, there's actually one, which is the first Asian country to introduce LGBT rights. There are quite a few protests. Actually, although I do applaud their willingness to do such progressive move, but in the end, that there's certain backlash, but from what I can see, they are managed. So again, back to the point of consensus where, both sides need to talk when we try to move forward as a nation. And of course, talking about our right to protest, really, in Malaysia, protests aren't a very normal thing to us. Even when times of like certain protests that happened a few years back, there are some supports, there are some against towards it, or even some counter protests towards it. So these are kind of dynamics that we rarely see, and certain people get pretty afraid of it. For those who are not really familiar with the idea, but through recent times, we get used to the idea, and it's not a bad thing. It just shows that we are starting to accept that we know that there are different views, and we will eventually, close the gap between both sides of the ideological divide.
Actually,
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
yeah,
Hoh Shan,
sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, so just wanted to add a few things. Everyone has made very, very valid and very, very interesting points here. I think what Mr. Dorian mentioned earlier about how the political the debate, the spectrum now is towards the right. We can see that in the sense that it is a progressive thing to give people rights that belong to them, natural rights that are theirs just by being a human being and just by being alive. It is progressive to do that, and I think we can see that it's a sign that like our discussion is so far right that to do just this basic humane thing is considered something extreme already, right? And also speaking of the protests, yes, like Mr. Dorian mentioned, there is the right to assembly in the Constitution. In fact, the 2 lines after that is the right to peaceable assembly or protests, right? I think if we actually ask general Malaysians, right, you ask them about their opinions on BLM or their opinions on the Hong Kong protests, they'll give you a very negative response because of the things they see on social media. Because social media does what it does best, right? It shows you the most extreme things. It shows you the people burning down the police station. It shows you the people burning down shops, and that's all they see. And I think that's why they have a very negative mindset. Part of it could also be due to our country's own troubled past, which is totally understandable. But I think that now more than ever is the time to teach people that it is their right, and to do it peacefully is definitely possible. It doesn't always have to end in violence. And yeah, I just think that's a very important thing. Dialogue is, of course, also very important. Yeah, and I believe protest is one form of dialogue. It's a dialogue between the people and the government. The people telling the government, hey, we like this, or hey, we hate this. And I think people should exercise it. Yeah.
I absolutely agree with Hoh Shan, and I also want to be careful in qualifying some of these counter protests as legitimate counter protests, because a lot of times, and whichever side, honestly, like if you ask the people who are actually on the streets, like, what are you protesting about? A lot of people have no idea, and especially in these counter protests, because they are politically motivated and they don't actually represent any actual concrete views, but it's more of a fear-based response almost to the new ideas that are coming in, and a sort of defense, flimsy defense even of the status quo. And I think this is something that we also see with Trump supporters. I'm getting just a lot of parallels with that, right? Because it's just mostly a knee-jerk reaction to something that they aren't even very sure of. And I think that has been fueling the conservatism movement all around the world, right? This move to push the Overton window even further to the right. And I think that is mainly a response to young people finally realizing their power and taking charge. But as we've always seen in previous years, every time there is a fight to expand rights, the rights will be expanded, and we will not go back. It's always a trajectory moving forward, and I feel like the more we do it, of course there will always be pushback, but at the end of the day, I try to take this positive like outlook in life lah. I feel like every time we look for progress, every time we want progress, we will get it.
Yeah, actually, right. So just a quick one. Sorry, I think what Mr.Dorian says reminds me of this quote from Martin Luther King, which he says that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So that's the key thing to take away here. It will be hard. The journey towards a better future is hard. It's never easy, but it is worth it, and we should continue to fight.
Yeah, it reflects on what Mr. Dorian said earlier about Malaysia being a young democracy and everything like that. Because I see us down the line, we definitely have a long way to go, and we definitely can build ourselves as a nation and definitely expand ourselves. And I don't know how to say it, but you get what I'm trying to say. But besides that, we've been talking about representation, having a voice and everything. But I want to touch a little bit on like China and like North Korea, like countries like those where countries, leaders rule with an iron fist, if you get what I mean. So what do you think about that? Because they seem to be making progress at the same time in their technology and everything, but the human rights are so restricted over in those countries. So maybe you guys want to talk a little bit about that.
For China, I'll just leave North Korea slightly. In world view, they aren't a very country in progress. They are still pretty much stuck in the 1980s. Still, in terms of development. But when it comes to China, yes, it kind of creates a worldview where, an authoritarian nation progressing really far to be pretty much the second largest economy in the world. And indeed, I do agree they are progressing. If you go there, you'll see they always develop new infrastructure, new technologies. Which in some cases exceed the US capability in terms of technologies that commonly used by society, and it does create that the sense where democracy does not allow such fast progress to go, while authoritarian systems allow things to prosper properly. Of course, not many authoritarian countries can do so. Actually, China is a very nice
special country.
So, from what I can see, in my opinion at least, is that China has, of course, a very big resource. They have the capital, the ability, and the manpower to progress. That's one. And two, they are, ever since they opened up their economy to the world in the early 90s, if I'm not wrong, there's a sense of so-called benevolence leadership, in a sense that their leadership always goes for progressing their own country, always going for to develop their country to be on par to the rest of the superpowers like the US, France, the UK, etc. And that allowed them to progress really fast the last 20 years. And it really gives the world whoa, China as an authoritarian country can prosper even faster than democracy, and that gives some a bonus mark towards authoritarianism, and it led to a lot of people to look forward to that kind of ideology, or that kind of meaning. But again, democracies, although slow, they are effective in my opinion, in the sense that they are preventing any issues of leadership, in which that you can just replace a leader if that leader is bad. However, in China, it doesn't happen actually.
Yeah, that's true.
It doesn't really happen. So as of now, China is going through, their leaders are always going to progress. They always want progress. Hence why you see the prosper and the development that is China. But along the line, if their leaders get, corrupted or starting to become more conservative and would like to on the status quo, their whole illusion might collapse entirely. While democracies, whenever that happens, at least things can change really rapidly. So to prevent a complete collapse of a country's progress, that's my view on that.
Yeah, actually, I think when it comes to China, you can see two types of examples. One is China and other countries, and within China itself, right? So for China and other countries, for every time someone mentions that, the authoritarian system of China is what led to its economic boom, and that Asian values for some reason are not compatible with democracy, you can always say, what about Korea? What about Japan? What about Taiwan? These are people they're the same region, right? They're the same people, almost the same, right? And yet, it does show that democracy isn't inherently a system doomed to fail in Asian countries. It is something that can work, and if we're looking in China itself, centralized power, completely centralized power, which is what authoritarianism is, produces usually extreme results. So they can be extremely good and extremely bad. For example, extremely good, right, is that China spent less than 40 years to completely eradicate extreme poverty. That is a feat that has never been accomplished by any other country in the history of the world, right? To eliminate extreme poverty entirely for 1 billion people. That's an extreme good. But the extreme bad is that in certain areas of the country, particularly in West China, you see people being more oppressed or more they have their lives under more constant surveillance in the name of national security, as Chinese government claims. So again, extremes are an extreme system produces extreme results, whereas democracy is sort of like it's sort of a balancer. You get this sense that yes, we cannot do extremely good things in democracy, but ideally extremely bad things shouldn't happen as well, because you can kick the people out.
They're just talking about that security thing and all that, how they keep track of the citizens and all that. I don't know how true this is, but I heard a while back that they have like this face recognition thingy that they have everywhere, and then the whole country has this point system and everything, something like that. Is that real? Actually, I just want to know, is that real?
If I'm not mistaken, the surveillance, yes, that's a thing. Like actually, that technology is pretty prevalent. You walk into Sunway Pyramid, you can also see the same thing at work already, right? It's the same technology. For the credit system, I may be wrong, but what I read was that yes, it's a thing, but it hasn't been fully implemented yet. It's still like certain cities, because the way they have grade and levels for their cities. So some cities have it, some don't.
I feel like if that was in Malaysia, I would be gone. My score would be super bad for now.
I just want to add on. China is a very fascinating situation to me, and it reminds me so much of Singapore under Lee Kuan Yew, just on a very, very large scale, right? And very much like Singapore as well, poverty was, very quickly eradicated. Like in China, it went from 88% in 1982, was it? Let me just check. Yeah, 1981, it was 88%, and in 2015, it's 0.7%. That is an incredible achievement, right? But also we need to remind ourselves whenever it's an authoritarian government, like in Russia, where statistics can be very skewed to sort of agree with whatever the central government wants to, the propaganda that the central government wants to push to glorify itself. But also that does I do not want to retract from the things that China has done, because we've seen the sort of progress that they are making, right? But also, like with Singapore, the availability of free speech, the ability to exercise free speech is very, very, very restricted. And I feel like for China to become mature is when we see people actually being able to voice out their opinions. And like what we are seeing in Singapore is that, people are starting to, exercise free speech, but there's still a lot of resistance towards it. So then you might look at things imploding. And I think, China will be something to actually really take a look at. But also, because a lot of people have been raised out of poverty in this time, right? So the chances of them doing it is lower than the chances of their children doing it, like what we are seeing in Singapore now. So I think it's something that's worth watching. And I think it might be easier for North Korea actually to break free compared to China. Because, the oppression is very real, and it's very, it affects everyone outside of Pyongyang and even people inside of Pyongyang. Whereas in China, if you're not Uyghur, if you're not from Tibet, the chances of you feeling it might be even lesser. So, which is why we see a lot of support for the social credit system as well, mostly from the urban population of China. And I think the nuances of China is very interesting to explore, and I encourage everyone to just read into it. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I like how we went from like Malaysia to US to China to Singapore, Russia, North Korea. We pretty much covered everything. Yeah. But yeah, I think right now we're going to go into a Q&A session. A few of our TLOrians have actually put in a few questions for us, so we'll make it real quick. Okay, so first question, anybody can take up this question. What is your opinion on party hopping? Yeah, it's a really good question. I would like to hear your answers.
All right, this is a very interesting topic. Okay, so I'm sure, for those who are not aware, party hopping is the idea where this politician A, who is in Party Durian, when he runs for general election, he says he's running with Party Durian, right? But then when he gets into parliament, he breaks away from Party Durian and he goes to Party Pisang Goreng. Okay, that's what happens. That's called party hopping. And it exactly this party hopping that led to the collapse of the Pakatan Harapan government in 2020. Oh my god, time flies. Yeah, but party hopping, I believe, in order to actually resolve the issue, because I believe, first of all, unfortunately, it is their right to free association, which party they wish to associate with. So MPs should be free to choose the parties that they want to associate with, because it might actually also better represent their people. However, to alleviate the concerns with party hopping, an alternative would be to actually let the people in that constituency recall their MP. So this means if, let's say, for example, I'll just use an example, it's a random example. Let's say the residents of Gombak don't like what the MP has done. An example. And then what they can do is they just get a significant amount of the population in Gombak to agree, and then they call for a recall vote where they will vote once again to elect a new MP. So this means that the MP's right to free association is not violated, but the people's right to representation is also protected. And I think that's a possible solution, maybe.
Okay. That's very interesting. Yeah, I think Daniel would like to ask another question after that from our TLOrians.
Can I just talk about the party hopping?
Oh yes, okay.
Yeah.
So I see. So because of the Westminster system, right, it's a bit hard to comment about this as well. But but I believe like this will be resolved once we vote for the representative that we want instead of the party that we want. This might be a bit of an unpopular opinion as well. I don't really have an opinion about party hopping. I think that the Malaysian political system needs to be overhauled a little bit. But voting for the representative we want, and making sure that our representative understands that we value their integrity, we value their values, their value system, and how they vote for things in parliament, right? And whether or not they do that on party lines, like we value them putting their integrity before party, and that we will vote that way, right? That we will stop voting for parties and instead we will vote for the person that we want. I think that will also do a lot in ensuring that we have the people that we want in parliament instead of the party that we want. Because party, I feel like voting on party lines is a surefire way for us to actually not be able to get away from the politics of what we are doing now, right? The current system where, our politicians believe, our MPs believe that they have to sort of like party loyalty is more important than what they actually feel like doing, right? And I guess strategically, yes, you still need to like do things along party lines, but letting our representatives know that we care more about whether or not they are going to be our representatives in parliament, because that's their job, right? Before like any sort of party loyalties that goes completely against what we want as people. I think once we do that, and once our MPs understand that we will vote that way, then I think a lot of things will change, including party hopping. So
very interesting remarks, and indeed, we as Malaysians, our right to vote and being in a democracy is one of the most important things, the most important right that we can exercise. And on to the second question that was raised by our fellow Taylorians, which is exactly on the matter of voting, and more specifically, our next general election, which will be our 15th general election, that according to it is scheduled to be on the 16th of September 2022, which is basically like what, this time basically, and we're going to be having a new election. But yeah, the main question is, right, in this new election, seeing how volatile our current Malaysian political scene is, where both on the government side and the opposition side, let's just say there are cracks on both sides. Both are cracking in their own right. So I'll give it a comment. Do you believe there will be significant change away from the status quo, in that we are in a very volatile situation by the next general election? What do you predict? What do you see moving forward once the 15th general election occurs? What is your view?
Okay, this is indeed a very hard topic to talk about. Because again, there's a lot of infighting, as what Daniel has said, within both sides of the aisle in Parliament. And in my own opinion, I don't think a status quo would maintain. There will be a lot of changes in terms of how people are going to vote and how they're going to see their own representative when they vote. This is because in recent events have opened our people, our citizens, their eyes in terms of how their politicians, how their representatives are actually due to these political infightings. So in my own opinion, of course, I can't really say who's going to win, because that's a really hard thing to say. It's very hard. Yeah. But what I can say is this. People will be more rationalized when they vote, best case scenario, or worst case scenario. People will be a lot more divided more polarized, there'll be even more divide in our society. Those are two different scenarios that I believe would happen after the next general election.
Okay, thank you so much, Kerwin. So I think the general elections and all the politics happening in our country, in the whole world, I think that's what we're really looking forward to. It is a really serious and very fun topic to actually discuss about with TLMUN. But we're going to call it a day and end the podcast over here. So I'd like to thank TLMUN for agreeing to be on this podcast with us. And thank you, Mr. Dorian, for being with us here today. We will release a new podcast every week on Monday at 2 p.m. So do check us out, our social media page on TUSC and TLMUN social media page as well. So yeah, I think we'll call it a day. And thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys soon.